We're going to have kind of a shorter show this evening. It's our team has a lot of expectations about tomorrow. I'm not going to get into a big deal about it right now, but tomorrow might be a lot of fun, and we are prepping for some stuff tomorrow. So today's short show is going to be shorter than normal. By way of preamble, for those that are new to our show, I'm going to give you a little bit of history. More than 20 years ago, I participated in the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research team for the space elevator, for Earth's space elevator. That was 2001, 2, and 3, 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I started the first iterations of Liftport Group. We were fully expecting to build an elevator in space. That was our plan. And so with that, we focused on carbon nanotubes and material sciences and the mechanical processes of climbing. So we made some early strings. Honestly, they were not that good. And if they had been good, you would have heard of them by now. It does look like there's some hope on that horizon. There's some folks in England that are doing really good work, but they're not the only ones. So many people are still working on that string problem. We built robots to climb into the sky. We had balloons, large balloons tethered to the ground with robots climbing back and forth. We got as high as a mile and went as long as 60 days, but those were two different experiments. In 2007, as the economy started crashing into 2008, we got crushed and the first version of Liftport closed. Fast forward to 2012, we started the company again to focus on the lunar space elevator infrastructure. And that's where we've been ever since. So for more than a decade, almost 15 years, we've been focused exclusively on the lunar elevator. I still hope that an Earth elevator is constructed, but I have some skepticism and some doubts. And so rather than put my efforts into that, Liftport has been focused on a lunar elevator for more than a decade. The company went out of business a second time in 2014, again from lack of funding, and that was pretty tricky. So 2012, 13, and 14, primarily funded through a Kickstarter effort, but still didn't have any traction. And then finally, I think the one that's going to stick, the history is going to be like, oh, this is when it worked. We started in 2017 and start growing into 2018. Not big. The first version of Liftport was 14 people. The new version has fluctuated between 1 and 6 people. So we're not as big as we were the first time around. And then when the pandemic hit, we were very close to closing the doors again. But through some perseverance and a terrific team, we stuck around. And we wound up doing a surprising pivot. A couple of years before, we had some presentations and done some studies with the investigations with the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force. Prior to Space Force being created, he was the chief scientist of Air Force Space Command at the time. And so he threw us kind of a question and a little bit of a challenge to host an online conference around a problem that was being looked at the Pentagon. And that went really well, surprisingly well. And as a result, we wound up pivoting during the pandemic into online conferences. And we did 27 online conferences. We're about to do our 28th. But then as the pandemic shifted yet again, we moved away from online conferences and started focusing on podcasting and shows. So between our channels of youtube.com/Liftport and our Spotify channel, Spotify, just look for DareGreatly space. You're going to find hundreds of hours of really great content from leaders in the space sector. I want to point out that we're not abandoning working on the lunar elevator. We're still focused on that. But in order to stay in business as a viable business, we have created a media arm. We call it Better Futures. And through Better Futures, we host a bunch of different shows, a bunch of different podcasts. So we do this twice a week, DareGreatly Space twice a week. And the Mars Society and the Space Frontier Foundation both entrust us with their shows. Red Planet Live happens once a month, and the Space Frontier Foundation's Pioneers of Commercial Space series that happens 3 times a month. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, same time. For me on the West Coast, it's 5 o'clock. You figure out what your time zones around the world. But we've been doing this for since October last year, and it's really been really powerful. We've had some amazing guests. We continue to have some great guests. And the way we operate is really just three main areas, right? We focus on the infrastructure of space, the hardware, the stuff we want to build. Like that's the stuff that drives us. But we look at the underlying elements of money and policy. How do you pay for the things that we want to do, right? If we want to build an infrastructure, how do we pay for that? And that often comes down to venture and angel funding and governmental contracts. So those are the 3 areas: infrastructure, money, and policy. And we do this in 3 different kind of formats. We often have a guest. That's we like that the best. Like our internal team likes having guests, but we also do shows that are really focused on current events and news, and that's what today's show is about. And then also deep dives into policy. If there are new governmental documents that are significant. Today we're going to do a new show, and as I said, it's going to be a little shorter than normal, again, to prep for tomorrow. We're all pretty excited and optimistic about the Virgin Galactic launch tomorrow. And as just a tiny story right now, I was on the ground. I was on the tarmac the day that Burt Rutan's team launched for the X Prize, the first flight. And it changed the rest of the world, right? Yes, it was a long time ago, but I think it is very safe to say that the ripple effects of that event are still being felt. So tomorrow we're gonna do a live stream with Virgin, and fingers crossed they get to fly, and that's their first commercial flight. So we're all kind of prepping for that tomorrow. So rather than make tonight's episode long, we're gonna focus on that. Okay. So what do we got going on today? It's just a smattering of news. There's nothing that's like, oh, big news that we want to kind of dig into, but it all kind of floats around going back to the moon. So I'm going to pull up a somewhat snarky article on purpose. Now, I kind of like the Register. It is not everybody's cup of tea, but I kind of like the snarky flavor of their reporting. But this is the article. This is the piece I want you to pay attention to, right? I don't want China to go to the South Pole with humans and then say, this is ours, stay out. The administrator of NASA former Senator Nelson says that America's in a space race with China. Now, that's a really important distinction. I want to stick with that for a second. I'm pretty sure everybody knows that Artemis is NASA's mega program to return humans to the moon. That's pretty amazing, and we're going to be talking about that quite a bit here today. But back in the early days of our first shows, we had Dr. Roger Launius on our show. Launius was a very senior historian in the U.S. Air Force, which led him to become the chief historian of NASA. And then ultimately that led him to a senior administration curation role at the Smithsonian Institution. And when we were talking way back in, maybe it was November, maybe it was December, he categorically said we are not in a space race. And he had some really good arguments for why we weren't. And so if you're interested in that, go back to our Spotify channel and take a look at that, or take a listen to that. His argument then was that there is nobody like the Soviet Union versus American rivalry the way that we were back then in the 60s, early 70s. And I liked that argument. I did. Then fast forward into the springtime of this year, documents started emerging out of NASA and out of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and in some cases, U.S. Space Force, where the word first, just the word first, started appearing. And lo and behold, when you put the word first in an official document, that is the starting gun of a space race. So I think it is kind of important that people start to pay attention to this. I 100% think we're in a space race, and I've thought that for a while. Not with Russia, not with Russia this time, but with China. And I think it's kind of fascinating. And if this is the headline from Administrator Nelson, that has geopolitical implications all over it. And here's what he says. Here's what he says more specifically. One goal is to land on the moon's south pole, where scientists suspect there is water and ice, a vital resource for human survival. Quote, I don't want China to get to the South Pole first with humans and then say, this is ours, stay out. If indeed we find water in abundance, if indeed we find water in abundance there, that could be utilized for future crews and spacecraft. We want to make sure that's available to all, not just to the one that's claiming it. Okay, that's really interesting. And it kind of puts the American space program in a defensive role, not in a military perspective, but in a tactical perspective, saying, look, we might not be the first humans to land at the South Pole. I think his argument about get to the South Pole first with humans is a direct linkage to the fact that China is the first on the far side of the moon with robots, right? So does first mean robots or does first mean with people? I think clearly this says first means people. And with that context, further in this article, and we're going to talk about some more in a moment, quote, Russia also has similar aspirations and is planning to launch a Luna 25 robotic lander designed to probe the regolith and plasma and dust in the lunar pole exosphere. And that's supposed to happen this Friday. So we are pretty excited about that. I do not consider, this is me, not the NASA administrator. I do not consider Russia to be the technological threat that that once upon a time they were. Uh, I think they have, without getting a lot into politics and their recent the situations that they've caused, um, I don't see the Russian economy being strong enough to support the luxury of an expanded space program. Um, so, think that over for a second. But in this case, I think Russia going to the moon is pretty aspirational. They haven't been there in a really long time, in the same way that the America, has not been there in a really long time. Although we have kept up our explorations in different modes, whether that's partnering with India or doing it ourselves with the LCROSS and the LRO missions. So we never really stopped going to the moon, although we did have some long pauses. Russia has effectively stopped going to the moon. So this is a big step for them. This is a big step. And it's also important to note that they have signed formal documents to be a part of China's lunar missions and lunar efforts. So I think that's kind of like geopolitically interesting. So interesting article. I'm going to post this in the link in the chat here. Just a moment. Let me come back to that just a second. 1 second longer here. One thing else that I want to kind of point out. There's a mission that we're going to be talking about here in a moment, but the Canadian Space Agency is really involved with it. So I think that's going to be pretty cool. Okay. Let me switch gears here. Give me a second. Lots of comments in the chat. Let me take a look at that. Give me a second. Wow. So here's Dr. Plata. Has anyone of significance, i.e. NASA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, laid out a specific plan with details on how a large base settlement will be established? No, not really. Not really. I would love to be able to show you graphics and imagery and a document that says this is the plan. But no, there's no timelines that are believable. We're going to talk about that in the news here in just a moment. There's no plans that are believable right now. Lots of people have pretty graphics. We have created our own pretty graphics, but a hard budget that's defined with deliverables, with deadlines and milestones. No, I really wish I could say that existed, but it does not. Now, counter to that, because you asked about NASA, SpaceX, and Blue, counter to that, the pairing of Russia and China have in fact put out some declarations about what they're going to do. And because they're not as transparent and the finances and milestones are a lot murkier, it's really hard to say for sure where they're at. The People's Republic tends to issue statements, build things, and then issue announcements after they've done it. So really hard to say. But right now, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have that. Yeah. And Dr. Tompkins, who was our guest just a few days ago, posts, we're in a government and technological infrastructure race. Space is a part of it. That's a really important distinction, right? I focus on the space element, but this is correct. It's across all sectors. Robotics, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, chips, all the kinds of different computing technologies. Space is an element of all of that, but space is a race unto itself. And you're absolutely right. There's definitely bragging rights and social political superiority for the winners. So it is really important. The Pentagon issued a document from the Joint Chiefs. I'm not sure I can find it quickly, but I'll look for it if I can. It's on competing. It's a new way of thinking about competing, specifically with China, but across the board. And it really is saying, look, we're not in a shooting war, but we're in a different kind of assault, nevertheless. And so how does the Pentagon writ large, that's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, and to a lesser degree, the Coast Guard, how does the DoD react when it's not a shooting war, but it's definitely a competition? So I'll see if I can find that. It's fascinating. Space is a component, but it's not the whole story. So thanks. Appreciate those comments. Okay. I'll come back to some comments here in a second. Wow, these are great comments. This is maybe the most interesting set of comments we've had. This is a really lively chat we got going on here. I want you two to meet each other. If you don't mind, I'm going to post your links in I'm going to post your LinkedIn connections so that you two should talk, because you two should definitely talk. No, Leah, this isn't the document I was looking for. It's do a search for Joint Chiefs of Staff, Miley, Milley, and competing. That might do it. If you can. If you can't, don't worry about it. I don't know what this document is that you sent me. I don't know what it is, so I can't look at it right now. Okay. Let's pull up the other one. So we got that one. No, not that one yet. Okay. Give me a second here. All right, so these are just great images. This is all about India's rover that launched a few days ago. I think it's super cool. I'm going to post the link here in the chat. Yeah, Leah, this is the document I was looking for. Thank you. I'm going to post that in just a moment. So, so we just talked about Russia just briefly, but there's a different kind of space race happening right now, not necessarily on the political spectrum, but on the technological, and it's between India and Russia, because Russia launches on Friday to the moon. Their trajectory is more speedy, more direct. India is copying kind of the slower path that they used on their first mission to, or not their first lander mission to the moon that didn't succeed. That didn't it landed, but it was a crash landing. It was a crater landing. So India's taking a slower path to the moon. And so even though Russia launched later, they might land sooner. So here's India Basically taken 2 weeks ish to get there. But they're there, right? This is phoning home with some photos. The spacecraft will conduct further engine burns to bring it into a circular track about 100 kilometers above the surface of the moon a week ahead of the expected landing attempt. They've got some video in here. This is the thing I wanted to point out, right? The 6 billion rupee, roughly 73 million US dollars. The mission aims to make a precise landing in the vicinity of the moon's south pole. If it is successful, India will join the United States, the former Soviet Union, and China as the only nations to perform a soft lunar landing. I want to point out that they've tried this before. We just talked about their crater, but the way that they write this is technically very accurate. They don't say Russia. They say the former Soviet Union, right? Because they're different. They're different companies. They're countries. They're different countries. So I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful about India's efforts. It's remarkable that they've been able to do this. Think about this, though. This is 2 missions inside of 3 years, and both of them were under $100 million each, right? NASA cannot do that. I mean, proven that they cannot do that, right? Not 2 missions in 3 years, and certainly not under $100 million per lunar lander mission. Now, I have some hopes and some potential optimism for the CLPS program, the Commercial Lunar Servicing Program. But they certainly aren't doing it under $100 million, and they certainly don't have 3-year turnaround times. So hats off to the Indians for being, one, for their commitment, their stick-to-itiveness, and the grit to do this. 2, for their budget. And 3, for just rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. Right? They had one crash. Okay, fine, so be it. Move to the next one and try it again. So, hats off to those folks. I'm pretty happy about that. More comments. Here's the. Thank you. This CIS document is the one that I was referencing. U.S. Joint Chiefs new strategy paper on joint concepts for competing. The actual document is not posted. Is that right? What? Okay, do another search on this with the word PDF in there. This Center for Strategic International Studies, great program. It's a think tank that really pays close attention to space and to national defense. Do one more search on the same thing, but put PDF in there to get the actual document. But really worth reading. This article is worth reading for context and background. Okay, I hope that answers your question there. I'm going to post Doug's comment. If China lands 2 taikonauts on the lunar South Pole and declared that now everything within their sight were off limits to all other countries, he continues with, 1, would any other country accept their claims? And 2, would they physically defend their claim at risk of causing war on Earth? I do not know the answers to either of those things. I suspect strongly that most nations, especially those with space power capability, launch capability, would not accept their claims. And would they physically defend them at risk of war? I hope we never have to know the answer to that question, because that is kind of terrifying to me. That's kind of spooky. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know that they have, when they built out the islands, the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, in the area kind of near the Philippines, um, they get all kinds of angry when America drives its aircraft carriers and destroyers through that area. They really don't like it when we drive our cruise missile carriers through that area, but they haven't started a war over it. So I'm going to guess that the answer is no, based on their current responses to current challenges. But yep, that is a spooky, spooky scenario, and I think it is one we have to pay very close attention to. Yeah, I think, when we landed and planted our flag, we did not claim territoriality over the moon. That's a really important piece of history that's often overlooked. So, okay, want to move on to another topic. So I love this because I think this is just the best indication of NASA's new right stuff. I've been saying for a long time that the definition of the right stuff. Not everybody even knows that phrase, but it's from a movie from a long time ago, referencing the early days of going to space, and the early days used to mean it used to mean fighter pilots from the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, or the Navy, the Marine Corps, and sometimes the and Air Force, because they were kind of combat tested, stress tested, biologically tested, and because the risk of going to the moon was so tricky, that this was a community of people they already knew a lot about. And then over the years, the right stuff has evolved into, not biasing by color or gender, not biasing on culture, but really a meritocracy of kind of the best and the brightest that we have to offer. And I think it's really exciting. I think it's long, long, long overdue. I'm definitely on board with that. This article is really focusing on, this is the ship that they think is going to take them there. This is the Orion capsule, primarily built by Boeing. It's got all kinds of problems. It is, where's my number? I lost my number. Maybe I'm on a different article, and this might not be the reference article I was looking for. If memory serves, and I'm sorry, I thought I had an article with the actual numbers on it. It's something north of $1 billion over budget and nearly a decade overdue. So that it's finally getting close to maybe perhaps not lighting them on fire when the heat shield problem gets solved. We don't know. I have to say optimistic that this is our best and brightest and that everything is going to be fine. But I am worried about that vehicle. I'm worried about all the vehicles actually that are going to space right now. Yeah. So interesting. I was trying to find stats. I thought maybe I pulled up the wrong article on this one, so I apologize for that. Here, Daniel wants to talk about battle bots on the moon. Well, let me tell you, they are not on the moon. They are in America's Midwest. I was pretty surprised by this. But yes, will there be battle bots on the moon? I'm pretty sure of that. Actually, Daniel, it was our conversation. It was our conversation Monday that made me wonder about this. So actually, our conversation spurred this question mark in my head, and so I spent a little bit of time looking into this. So I'm glad you're on the call, because this actually was, you were the catalyst for this conversation. So there's a new report. I want to highlight it. National Bureau of Economic Research. I actually don't know who this is, so I'm a little curious. I'm going to dig into that a little bit further. But they're talking about, hey, we are building a lot of bots. What are we going to do with them? How is it going to work, and where is it going to go? I think this should put some people's minds at ease. Robots are mostly complements to production workers, not substitutes for them. Everybody talks about, oh, they're going to come and take your jobs. I've never really believed that, and it's kind of nice to have that backed up. But this is one of the things that really got my attention. 3/4 of the bots in America are in just 10% of US regions, while the bottom 50% have almost no robots. So this is like highly concentrated activity and production by these machines. Now, I live in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of shipping here. I don't know of a lot of robots in my area. I can't think of any. Maybe they're here and I'm just not aware. I thought maybe down at the port. And there are automated systems, human-tended automated systems, but I can't think of any big robotics centers in the area. Now, we're right around the corner from Amazon, right? I'm near Amazon headquaters. And Amazon has put robots basically in every zip code by just having sorting and packing machines and distribution machines all around the country and around the world. So I would say there's a strong concentration, but from an industrial perspective, with that specific outlier, I can't really think of that. And so it kind of makes some sense to me that Iowa, Michigan, Kansas, and Minnesota are among the top 5 states using robots in manufacturing. And they're saying manufacturing, but everything that I'm seeing is pointing to agriculture. So a little bit of disconnect there. I really can't dig into it any more than that. And then this last piece I think is pretty clever. While robots are contributing to national GDP, they're not yet turning around America's lagging productivity gap. But that mirrors a 1980s phenomena, 1980s, so 40 years ago, phenomena where computers spread without productivity spiking until the 90s. So it took 10-ish years, a decade and a half, for the robots to be in place before there was enough to make a difference. So maybe it's just going to take time for those robots to kind of do what they're doing. And then there was a section in here about clustering. Robot hubs. the lead author worries about a separation where some manufacturing becomes more high tech and robust, and other parts gets left behind. We've been saying that for a while. So curious to see how this plays out. I would not have picked Iowa, Michigan, Kansas, Wisconsin, and Minnesota as the top 5 states. To me, that screams farming, but this report is saying manufacturing, so I'm definitely confused by that. You can make a lot of claims about who the leading academic groups are, but I would probably put Carnegie Mellon in the Detroit, Michigan area, either at the very tippy top or one of the top 5. And then maybe because of engineering for car manufacturing, that has moved into the surrounding local states. That's me making a guess. I don't have any evidence for that, but that's my guesswork and kind of putting the parts together. Okay, let me post that link here. What are you saying here? Give me a second. Oh, I like this comment. Thanks a lot, Daniel. From a humanity and science perspective, we should be able to celebrate each other better, much like the Olympics outside of politics. I would love that. I think that would be great for the whole world to kind of have that more collaborative, friendly competition, but not the kind of competition that starts bullets flying. Okay, Doug is still asking some questions about China. My point by asking the question is to suggest that concerns over China and the moon are very overplayed. China can't and won't make a plausible claim over lunar polar territory. I'm surprised, Doug, but I don't agree with you. Usually I do. I think you know that. But in this case, I don't agree with you. The folks I know in and around the Pentagon very much are concerned about China making a claim. And in fact, Russia about 3 years ago took a submarine under the Arctic because of climate change and shifting currents. There were some lanes, some commercial lanes that opened up. And so shipping happened in a place it doesn't usually happen because there wasn't ice where there usually is ice. And because of that, Russia actually went to the seafloor of that area, dropped a flag, and claimed it. Nobody took that seriously, but I don't think countries are above making those claims. Now, do they stick? I don't know, but I don't. The folks that I know don't think it's unreasonable that China might make a claim. All right, we're winding down here in a minute. I think everybody knows this. Here in Seattle, the International Space Station folks had a really big meeting. It was one of the largest that I'm aware of. Even though it was only a few miles from me, I did not attend because it wasn't specifically relevant to the work I'm doing. But I kind of wish in hindsight that I had gone because it was so close. But here's the quote that I think that matters. The NASA ISS program manager, Joel Montalbano, says we're not going to slow down and slide into the end of the decade. We're running full steam to the end of 2030. There's been talk about Russia exiting the partnership in 2024. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. As of earlier this year, Roscosmos committed to 2028. I think that's a bluff. I think that's a politically motivated bluff. I think they're until the last minute, because I don't think that Russia can build its own space station. So I know that people say they can, but I am skeptical if they could build their own space station given their economy right now. So I think 2030 looks pretty likely, and that gives the other space station companies time to get their systems tested. So that's my thoughts. I'm hoping about that. Daniel, I don't have any way for you to do that. I'm sorry. If you can write it in a more clear message, I can read that message, but I can't put you on screen. That's not a capability in the system like this. Sorry. Okay. With that, I think I'm going to kind of wind down. I'll give you a moment to respond, Daniel, if you'd like, because I'm happy to have your clarity. While we're waiting for that, I'll show one more screen. I love bots. We just talked about bots. I love the moon. We just talked about the moon. So these are the current set of bots that are aiming for the moon. I've gone down to Jet Propulsion Lab and seen some of their lunar rovers. Martian rovers mock-ups. I've talked to some of their senior software designers about some of the things that they're looking at. I love this stuff. This is a pretty small bot, and it doesn't quite look moon-worthy to me. So I was a little surprised by this. I'm also really surprised the suspension that it has seems pretty strange. So anyway, that's kind of what we've got. I just thought this was kind of fun. I think it's actually really important that they're making rovers smaller, and maybe even more capable. So let me close this off here. Pardon me just a moment. There we go. These robots, we used to make them in hyper sterile clean rooms, and only the most sophisticated technology and only the most well-trained people could build these things. And now we're getting to the part where they're pretty robust. Most college engineering labs have the capability to start working on them in the same way that most college engineering labs have the capability to start working on CubeSats, because there are standards, there are best practices, and this technology is becoming, I won't say ubiquitous because that seems extreme, but it's known, it's well known. Like a researcher goes from one school to the next school, a student goes from one school to the next school. And I think that this diffusion of knowledge across a lot of different platforms is super important. And it is making better bots across the country and around the world. So we're going to see that over time. Leah's comment is the wheels, exclamation point. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about this that seems a little strange. This is the kind of work that we want to do, that Liftport wants to get back into. Our robots were very different, but that kind of robotic capability is pretty well established, and a lot of places can make it. Now, could we do that today and replicate it? Absolutely not. But with a few partnerships and alliances with some schools, I think we have some stuff that we could offer. So I'm going to close with that. Daniel did write some comments, so let me review them. Just give me a second. I'm just going to post them on screen unread, and let me see what you got here. I'm just trusting here. Looking at space agriculture, the scale of production is much different. Yeah, you were telling us about that just Monday, right? Like, it's a scope and scale that is really hard for me to imagine. You're not having one laborer over the course of a season harvest enough to feed tens of thousands of people. No need for it to be robotic. Oh, interesting. All right. In the U.S., you see, I don't know what that means. You see really expensive. You see really expensive harvesting equipment require much higher inputs of fertilizer and pesticides to maintain maximum yields to make that system economical. And you see the abandonment of smaller fields, that it's not worth taking a $5 million. Oops. You know what's happening, Daniel? Okay, this isn't making sense because it's not all of your comments are going onto the screen. So let me just do this a different way. I'm going to just stop this, hide this. Let me do this a different way. And folks, just for you, everybody to know, like, I wouldn't normally do this, but Tompkins literally was our guest on Monday. He has a PhD. I'm going to call him a plant whisperer. And he's focused on building sustainable, large scale agriculture in space to feed the populations in space. So I'm definitely giving him a little more leeway than I typically would. But I love his comments. So let me start over. Looking at space agriculture, the scale of production is much different. You're not having one laborer over the course of a season harvest enough to feed tens of thousands of people. No need for that to be robotic. That's interesting because I was maybe misinterpreting that the other day. But in the U.S., you see really expensive harvesting equipment require much higher inputs of fertilizer and pesticides to maintain maximum yields to make that system economical. And you see the abandonment of smaller fields. It's not worth taking a $5 million piece of equipment another 2 miles down the road for decentralizing the intensity and distribution over a smart, environmentally redundant system could yield much higher returns with smaller, cheaper robots. But unfortunately, that's not the direction. Everything's headed with robotics and agriculture at large. Not all of this is making total sense here, sir. I apologize. You were saying the other day on Monday about how I think you said this kind of after we went off the air, when it was just you and I having a conversation. But the idea that Florida used to have hundreds or thousands of economically viable farms, and over time, economies of scale forced many of the producers out of that line of business. So you got mega farms and very, very few smaller individual farms. So I think that's where you're going with these comments. It's a little hard to interpret this, but With that, I am going to go ahead and sign off. I was trying to get out here a little bit early. Thanks everybody for being a part of this. And by the way, I love having the comments in the in the chat. Doug posts one last thing about Russia doesn't need us to build a space station. They can join China in theirs. Yes, but the consensus on Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, is that that's bad for their image, right? That they want to be able to stand on their own, and currently it doesn't look like they can. So not really sure how that's going to play out. Okay. All right. With that, y'all, I'm going to say thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks for all the comments. These are fantastic. It's actually super fun to have an active chat session. So I like that a lot. All righty. With that, we're going to go. We've got some good guests next week. We've got Red Planet Live, Mars Society shows coming in. We are going to probably do a deep dive. We have some new stuff in development, so that's really exciting for us, kind of as our company is starting to grow a little bit. And with that, I'm gonna say goodnight. We are going to try and do a live show tomorrow in conjunction with Virgin Galactic's first commercial flight. So we're not sure how that's going to go. We've never done a watch party before, so not at all sure how that is going to play out, but we do nothing if not experiment with our media channels. So, all right. Thanks a lot, y'all. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.